Yesterday, a recommendation was sent to the FDA in regards to the updated 2024-2025 COVID vaccine, where they recommended that the updated formulation should target JN1. Buckle in, because in 10 minutes or less, I'm going to go through this entire 8-hour meeting. First, this was an FDA Advisory Committee meeting, where their title is VRBPAC, or the Vaccines and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee, where the committee had 2 target questions to answer. The first deciding yes, no, or abstain, stating that the updated COVID vaccine formulation should target a lineage of JN1, and then to provide discussion to say which lineage it should target. And again, only a monovalent vaccine was on the table, which means only a single target. So bivalent or trivalent was off the table, which would be multiple targets. Starting off, we had a presentation by Natalie Thornburg, where the CDC is showing serology testing, where they're differentiating individuals that have vaccine-induced immunity only, hybrid immunity, which means vaccine and infection, and then infection only, where blue is infection, yellow is hybrid, and gray is vaccine only, where by November of 2023, approximately 88% of the population in the US has had at least one COVID infection, where approximately only 10% have not. Next, something I found very interesting is that they're defining the winter wave as a period of antigenic shift or phylogenetic shift, and the summer waves as a period of diversification. So during the last winter, there was that big period of XBB 1.5. Then we had this huge diversification of strains, and then we had JN1 emerge and take over, and then we're starting to have a diversification of strains again, which is why it's hard to narrow it down and target a single variant for a monovalent vaccine, a single strain vaccine, because we don't know which one would then be theoretically taking over for the winter. However, it's important to note this is just 1 year's time period scale. We don't know that this is going to hold true even for the summer. We could see a strain replacement where one variant completely takes over already in the summer, or we could see diversification from summer through winter. You can't really establish a pattern from an N of 1 a single year, but this is something to watch for, because if this pattern holds up where we have diversification and then strain replacement as our pattern for the summer and winter waves, that's just a good thing to know. Next, they showed this diversification plot between variants. So when they say strain replacement, so XBB 1.5 is down here, and then it was replaced eventually by JN1. So that's sort of the distance between strain replacement, at least in this current scenario, where they're assuming that 2 of these boxes away would be considered significant change. But that's based on the influenza model. We don't know if that's true for the COVID model. Maybe just 1 box could be significant, where we see JN1 here, and then KP3 is about a box away. And then for our discussion on vaccine effectiveness throughout the rest of this, and then for our continued discussion on vaccine effectiveness, if it says that a vaccine has 80% effectiveness, that does not mean it only works 80% of the time. It means that in a vaccinated population, 80% fewer people will contract the disease, and that's if they come into contact with the disease. And then they showed us a breakdown of vaccine uptake in adults, where the youngest population of people were the least likely to get vaccinated, and the oldest were the most likely to get vaccinated, and that we have to do even better on childhood vaccination for COVID, especially in the youngest child population of 6 months to 4 days. They have the lowest rate of vaccine uptake, so parents really need to do better. And then Paul Offit being a well-known person that's against vaccines for all. I personally would classify him as anti-vaccine. Is like, well, do young adults really even need the vaccine? Shouldn't it just be targeted to old people? And Ruth Link-Ellis from the CDC answered that question, saying that in all age groups, the unvaccinated people are the ones that are getting severely hospitalized in critical illnesses with COVID, and that they're seeing this in very young and very old people. So yes, it's something that should be applied to all ages. So do not quote that man. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He got very firmly shut down. Next, the CDC showed us lots of vaccine effectiveness studies, where the 2023-2024 XBB 1.5 vaccine was about 45% effective, where early on it was about 58% effective, but once JN1 emerged, it dropped down to about 37% effective, where I personally want to specifically highlight the immunocompromised populations, where it shows that by about 4 months, they have essentially no immune protection. And like I've mentioned before, the CDC reaffirmed that yes, immunocompromised people can get a COVID vaccine every 2 months. I believe this is something that people are just not aware of. That means if you space it out right, you could get 6 COVID vaccines a year for immunocompromised individuals. So please take that up. Next, it was brought up that there are essentially two main reasons for waning immunity over time with COVID vaccination. The first is that the active immunity just simply wanes over time, over the course of about 6 months in immune competent people, where much of that active immunity is gone by months 3 and 4, but also with the rise of new variants. Because recall, vaccines became available late September, early October. It takes about 2 weeks for immunity to build, meaning that this point right above my head right here is essentially when people were getting vaccinated and starting to build immunity. And then over the next few weeks, JN1 started building up. And so that's another reason. I also want to highlight this reminder for children aged 6 months to 4 years, where they're recommended to either get 2 doses of Moderna or 3 doses of Pfizer within that first year, or some combination thereof. Next, we had a presentation by the World Health Organization advisory group TAG-CoVAC, where they emphasize that what we see today for COVID is not likely to be relevant 8 months from now because we're going to have new variants by that time. And they emphasize that for people that are eligible, they should not delay getting a vaccine at this period to wait for the updated version of the vaccine. If you are eligible, you should get a vaccine right away. In the US, this would be a great period to do that because in about 3 months' time, in August, you'll be able to get a new vaccine with the updated formulation. The World Health Organization also demonstrated something I've been telling you for a while now, that when you get vaccinated, you get a back boost into the past, which is why it's very important to have that historic immunity from prior vaccinations, where they showed that infection alone is not doing it. It's only giving you very closely related protection, and this protection is at lower levels than you would get through vaccination. While with vaccination only or with an infection followed by vaccination, you are getting a back boost in immunity in addition to protection against more current circulating strains. So when you have this immune history from prior vaccination, you're going to have some protection, but this protection is going to be lower than a variant-specific vaccination, which as we see over here, that if you're vaccinated against JN1, you have a high immune expression against JN1, but you have significantly lower expression and protection against KP3, which is a JN1 subvariant, which shows that the further away COVID mutates, the less protection you're going to have. Where the WHO noted that the 3 major factors impacting virulent evolution are spike stability, the receptor binding domain positioning, and the ACE2 binding affinity, meaning how easy is it for the spike protein to change, how tightly it binds to a receptor, and where that receptor is located on the spike protein. As of June 5th, the WHO estimates that the global prevalence of KP2 is about 15% and it's heading down, and that KP3 is increasing at about 16.5% of variance proportion globally, where they very nicely show the problem here. So currently, we picked JN1 as our monovalent vaccine target. This assumes that we're going to have a close diversification of variants around JN1, where you would have that higher level of protection, which has the underlying assumption that other variants like KP2, KP3, or JN 1.23 aren't going to become the next predominant branch and have subvariants that increasingly move away from JN1. Where the problem is, how do we select which one of these are going to be moving forward, or is it going to be something that hasn't even popped up yet? So instead of taking an educated guess, the committee decided that we're not going to be in the business of chasing COVID variants, and that they're going to choose the ultra-conservative approach of selecting JN1, because regardless of which way COVID continues to evolve, it will have at least some protection. But as we saw early on in the presentations, the further away a virus evolves, the less vaccine effectiveness there is. So this approach assures a low level of vaccine effectiveness, but if a poor selection was taken like KP2, and KP3 ended up being the variant that had many lineages and continues to evolve on, that could be even poorly matched than JN1 was. So we can be immensely disappointed that yes, this is a terrible match. We're choosing to have it be poorly matched to current variants in circulation, which is going to assure a low vaccine effectiveness. However, there is still some vaccine effectiveness, and it's also going to bump up your prior immune history profile. So ultimately, yes, you should still get vaccinated. It is still going to be beneficial. It will still have positive effects. Next, we had presentations by Moderna, Pfizer, and Novavax. Moderna and Pfizer producing JN1 and KP2 vaccines that they tested. Novavax only producing a JN1 vaccine that they tested. And many committee members were swayed by the fact that if we didn't have JN1 be the selection, then Novavax wouldn't be available. And Novavax is good for people that fear mRNA vaccines and for people that have bad reactions like MCAS. So it's a good option, but it really only takes up 5% of the market for COVID vaccines. All said, for JN1, they'd be ready by August. And there you have it. That's 8 hours of committee presentation summarized into less than 10 minutes.